Hey, welcome back to Morning Joe. It's Monday, December 24th. I hope you've bought all of your Christmas presents. And if you haven't, I'll see you out after the show. Still with us, we have historian and author of The Soul of America, Jon Meacham. We've got columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post, David Ignatius, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, Washington bureau chief for USA Today, Susan Page. And let's bring into the conversation conservative radio host, author of How the Right Lost Its Mind, and an MSNBC contributor, Charlie Sykes. Also, MSNBC correspondent, Garrett Haake. And, you know, Charlie, let's begin with you and just ask the age-old question. Have you finished your Christmas shopping?
In case my wife is watching, really close, really close.
You're getting close. Okay, that's it. Yeah, I have the same answer for you, Jon Meacham. I'm sure you've bought all your duck boots and all your your khakis, all your Basswegians and the preppy stuff that you are buying.
Jay,
what?
It was a big moment when Jay Press got on Amazon Prime. I got to tell you, it was huge for me.
That is. I know that was big for all of us, Mr. Swanee. So, John, Donald Trump has now been on the national stage politically for the past three and a half years. We're moving into year 4. In June, it'll be 4 years since he went down the escalator with Melania, who, by the way, is flying back up to Washington, D.C. He's flown back up to Washington, D.C. There will be no Mar-a-Lago Christmas this year. We've been talking about, at least I believe, his administration is terminal now. He won't finish out his term. But I'm wondering what accounts for the durability? What accounts for the 35% that he still has standing by him?
I think part of it is a historically based number of permanently disaffected folks. 34% was the number that Joe McCarthy had in terms of national approval 3 months after he was censured in 1954-55. You have a significant chunk of people who don't trust the institutions of government to address their needs. And one of the things we always have to remember about presidential elections is they're choices, not referenda. And when you had a Clinton and a Bush on 80% of the tickets between 1980 and 2016, the choice of what we would say chaotic, what other people would say is constructively disruptive, depending on where you stand, choice of sending Trump to Washington. I think a lot of those people believe that the kinds of conversations we're having are slightly hysterical, they're Chicken Little, they're out-of-touch elitists, which seems redundant. Can you be an in-touch elitist? I don't know. But you have this sense that the way to make the system work is to send someone to disrupt it. And what we see as troubling signs, a lot of people in that 35% of the base see as, let's show them. And until we address that, then I think the political struggle is going to continue, and we're going to continue to talk as if we're not on the same planets.
Yeah, you know, that has been the case, David Ignatius. I wonder if we haven't actually crossed a threshold over this past week. Jon Meacham is so right. Confidence in institutions in the United States have been collapsing for some time, with one exception, the United States military. The United States military continues to be one of the most respected institutions anywhere, and those numbers keep going up. And you look at a poll that was released this week from the United States military about what they thought about General Mattis. 84% approval rating, only a 4% disapproval rating, twice the approval rating, actually, that Donald Trump had. And so I'm just wondering, David, what are you hearing from your sources inside the military? What are you hearing from your sources inside the community about the public humiliation? Not that anybody knows that James Mattis knows he's just fine, but Donald Trump's attempt to publicly humiliate a war hero and a great Secretary of Defense.
You know, Joe, support for the military is part of the Trump base. Trump likes to say that he's for a strong military and he has military families backing him. There is no symbol of the military that's more powerful these days than General Mattis. He just looks like he was born a Marine, born in that green Marine uniform. And people watched him suffer this president and finally snap, do something that was very un-Mattis-like. Mattis is usually unflappable. He just grits his teeth and gets on with it. Well, he didn't this last week. He resigned. And I found that in Congress, among the diplomatic corps, among Republicans who had been silent until last week, people were suddenly speaking out. People who've tried to kind of keep their counsel, keep options open for President Trump. Former Secretary Bob Gates, who preceded Mattis at the Pentagon. Steve Hadley, a Republican national security advisor. I was struck that some prominent members of the House sent a letter to the ambassador of Australia saying that they would use their Article 1 co-equal powers, how they put it, to make sure that the alliances that Mattis spoke up for in his resignation letter were preserved. This was people like Mac Thornberry, the head of the House Armed Services Committee. So I just see little rumblings of revolt among Republicans, you know, even maybe within that Trump base, of people saying, this is a bridge too far. You don't go after the Marine general who symbolizes the continuity of our military.
No, and James Mattis's departure was the most high profile, but just the latest in a long list of departures. The Trump administration has a record amount of high-level turnover, with top cabinet posts including Attorney General, Defense Secretary, EPA Administrator, White House Chief of Staff, all filled by acting replacements. The Interior Department and the Mission to the United Nations are also losing their leaders.
And I'm not sure that bothers much of his core base. You know, I mean, really to think about it, the last 2 years has been sort of an experiment about the depths of our tribalism. How much would we be willing to accept? How far could you push the line? And, you know, up until now, we've seen that there seemed to be no bottom. There seemed to be no limit. And I don't know if this administration is terminal, but there's no question about it. There are really fundamental cracks, and the way he's handling Mattis, you know, leaving aside just fundamental decency. I think Ron Brownstein made the point, leaving aside just the personal decency. I think that it would be some sort of a sense of self-preservation. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but can you imagine if there was a Republican primary challenge of Donald Trump by General Mattis, or if the Democrats were to put somebody like General Mattis on the ticket? This would be the worst nightmare of Donald Trump, because he has, you know, portrayed himself fraudulently as the strong man who backs the military, and basically General Mattis is in the process of calling BS.
Yeah, and it's something that I think not only Donald Trump, but Republicans themselves are going to have to worry about, because, as I've said, I could be wrong, but I don't think Donald Trump's going to be running for president in 2020, but there is a possibility that General Mattis could be a Democratic selection for a vice president, and boy, what a ticket that would be. So the chaos, Garrett, that Charlie was talking about has led to the third government shutdown in Donald Trump's fairly young administration. Obviously, there's been concern on Capitol Hill from Republicans. What is the latest there? I know that the Hill's largely abandoned right now, but what are you hearing from members that are still there and also members back in their district?
Well, there was a total lack of urgency to solve this on Friday and Saturday, the last day that there was really a chance to get anything done before the middle of this week. And I think the Mattis departure also had something to do with this. Republicans in particular were just totally deflated by the way last week ended. The Syria decision, Mattis going out, the falling apart of this Senate negotiated CR that was going to keep the government open, at least in the short term. Senate Republicans felt a little bit, if not misled, at least like the vice president maybe couldn't actually speak for the president. They felt like they had a deal in place. And when all that fell through, people kind of threw their hands up and got out of town. I was on the Hill all day Saturday interviewing lawmakers who were just carrying their bags through the hallways, kind of closing up shop for the year and heading home. Mitch McConnell closed the floor. He said we'll probably be in session on Thursday, but even that might not happen. That could turn into a pro forma session on Thursday. So this lack of urgency, this lack of any kind of vigor from Republicans who left town in particular feeling defeated. It's almost like everyone on Capitol Hill was looking to the start of this new Democratic majority in the House as a chance to reset and maybe get something done when they just staggered through the end of Republican control of Washington over the last week.
Boy, I thought it was so interesting, Garrett, that not only did you have Republicans not coming out and defending Donald Trump, but also there weren't a lot of Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, who were eager to attack Democrats. It wasn't the back and forth that you usually see in government shutdowns. And here's Republican Senator Bob Corker having some tough words for President Trump's decision to close the federal government over what the Wall Street Journal calls a phony border wall issue.
This is a made-up fight, so the president can look like he's fighting. But even if he wins, our borders are going to be insecure.
Trump hit back at Corker's criticism, saying that he refused to endorse a Tennessee Republican when he allegedly asked for it, causing his poll numbers to tank. Corker responded, tweeting, quote, "Yes, just like Mexico is paying for the wall. Hashtag alert the daycare staff." Gene, isn't it telling that you've been through, and I've seen so many of these government shutdowns, and the two sides always go on the Sunday talk shows, and they're all pointing fingers at the other side. The Democrats are destroying America. Have them reopen this government. Republicans doing the same thing. Silence this weekend for the most part from the Hill. These Republicans were hung out to dry, and they are not defending Donald Trump.
Right, because there was an agreement. They agreed on how to proceed. They were going to essentially kick the can down to February 8th, and that would be the next deadline, and then and fight during the month of January over wall funding and whatever else they wanted to fight over. And Trump just totally threw that agreement out the window. So yes, the Republicans were left to hang out to dry. I hope we're not being naive in asking, can this get any worse? Because I think it obviously can. That's kind of the business model of the Trump presidency. It has to be.
When that happens, Gene, I wonder, is there a Goldwater that says, I've got to walk over to the White House and tell this guy enough? Because again, Republicans by this point know that Donald Trump's brand of politics is toxic, the worst law since Watergate. It's going to get even worse in 2020 when the electorate expands.
Ultimately, you think there has to be someone like that, or a group of graybeards like that who will go to the White House and say just cut it out. But apparently not yet. And the Trump model is that no, we won't be talking about this this shutdown and the Mattis firing forever, because there will be something even more outrageous that we have to talk about in a week or so, or in 15 minutes. Who knows? Depending on his whims and his moods and his watching of Fox News. A great historian friend of mine reminded us recently that in Christmas Eve 1929, the White House was on fire. I think tonight we all need to party like it's 1929, because it's he's gonna pour gasoline on the fire, and so does that intervention that you talked about happen when the whole thing is ashes? Who knows?
Susan Page, what happens next?
Well, the question is not only are there, say, Republican graybeards in Congress who would be willing to go to the White House and have a very difficult conversation with the president, is whether the president would listen to them. Richard Nixon in that situation, Richard Nixon was someone who, despite flaws, believed in the institutions, in the system of government. I mean, he was more open to that conversation than I think President Trump might be. One thing about what President Trump is doing now is he's really doing exactly what he said he was going to do during the campaign. He is focusing on building a wall. He is retreating from U.S. commitments around the world militarily. And what's changed is that the infrastructure around him and his administration has gotten much less able to challenge him. You see, Mattis's departure is just the latest and perhaps most dangerous example of the weakening of the advisors who might be willing to challenge the president when he's doing something that they think is just simply wrong.
Well, and when they do challenge him, it's so frustrating. We hear time and again the president gets angry even when advisors tell him that what he's doing is a violation of the law. Everybody stay with us. When we come back, we're going to show you a photo of Churchill and FDR from December of 1941. And John Meacham will regale us with stories not of this alliance, but instead probably talk about the War of 1812. Actually, I think Meacham actually wrote a book on Franklin and Winston, and we'll talk about that when we return.
Presidential envoy for the global coalition to counter ISIS. How is it that the president doesn't know the point person in the battle against ISIS?
Now, you know the answer to that. The administration is thousands. The executive branch of government is millions of people. I have no idea who that person is. Never heard of him until yesterday. All I know is that there's an Obama appointee who saw an opportunity.
He was a Rehnquist clerk.
He was.
He served throughout the Bush administration. He's a lifelong Republican. He's not an Obama appointee. He was kept on.
Did he take that position under the Obama administration?
He was held over from the Bush administration.
But you see my point.
This is not a Democrat.
So I'm certain he's well known within the folks who follow this topic. The fact that the President of the United States doesn't know him, I don't think should cause anybody any concern.
Wow. I don't know what to say. Forget about the death of expertise and the death of experts. That's just contempt. That's for basic competence. The state of the White House, now that we're down to the D team, not very good, David Ignatius. And David, the fact that neither the acting chief of staff or the president knew who that was is nothing short of extraordinary. Talk about the president who claims to know more about ISIS than all of the generals, being as ignorant of what has made our fight against ISIS successful. And also, you write today about the state of this abandonment, this cowardly betrayal of the Kurds by Donald Trump. Where does this leave the Kurds?
In a mess. Joe, first about Brett McGurk. It is shocking. Brett McGurk is this president's point man against ISIS. He doesn't seem to realize it, but he's the person who leads our global coalition to fight this deadly adversary in the battle that Trump just claimed spuriously that he had won, that he didn't even know who his principal diplomatic advisor was. Tells you everything. So I wanted badly, because as you know, I've had the good luck to be able to travel in Syria a number of times, to talk with the person who's most affected by Trump's decision, and that is the commander of the Syrian-led, Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces militia that's been doing the fighting against ISIS. So I arranged through our special forces to call him last night at his headquarters inside Syria. We talked on an encrypted line for about an hour. And Joe, even in this period where just so many things that we see break our heart, I found that listening to this man talk in his quiet, careful, dignified way about a betrayal by the United States, which had promised a week before. They had sent an ambassador to see him who said, we won't be leaving until we have enduring victory against ISIS, until all Iranian troops are out, until we have a stable political settlement for Syria. A week later, Trump, on a whim, it seems, after a phone call from President Erdogan in Turkey, pulls the plug, leaving this guy holding the bag. His troops are on the front lines against what's left of ISIS in the far eastern part of Syria. And what blew my mind, I'll end it with this, Joe. I mean, after expressing shock at what America had done, I said, so what are you going to do tomorrow morning? And the answer is he's going to the front lines where he's still got 10,000 troops who are fighting as hard as ever in the mission that they used to fight jointly with us. Now they're fighting it alone. They suffered 29 dead since President Trump announced that he was, bailing out. 29 dead in this fight, and they're going to continue it because they know it's the right thing to do. And I close my piece saying, in this holiday season, when we think about keeping the faith, here's a reminder of the kind of ally we are betraying in pulling these troops out of Syria.
Let's bring in right now the national reporter for NBC News, Josh Lederman. Josh, tell us more about McGurk's departure and the president's reaction, not even knowing who his point man was on ISIS.
Right, just as the president is claiming that he's done more to destroy ISIS than anyone else and that he gets credit for defeating the Islamic State group, but at the same time doesn't know the guy that has been working on this for years and has been America's point man on this. Look, Brett McGurk was already planning to leave in February. His departure moved up significantly by the fact that he felt like he simply couldn't serve in this administration anymore after spending the last years going around the world to the 60 some odd countries that have been fighting with the U.S. and supporting this coalition at America's request that, look, come join this fight, put your men and women out on the battlefield with us, because the U.S. is committed to Syria's future and to making sure that it's not a safe haven for extremists to once again plot attacks on the West. And there was simply no tenable way for Brett McGurk to continue in that job after the president willy-nilly on a phone call with President Erdogan of Turkey decided, you know what, forget it, we're pulling out.
And so talk about the conversation and the president being assured by Erdogan that it was okay for the United States to basically cede Syria to Assad, to Russia, to Iran, to ISIS, the remnants of ISIS, and to Turkey.
Right. So this is something that foreign leaders seem to be growing more and more adept at as the Trump administration approaches the end of the second year, which is if they know what the president's underlying instincts are, they can often exploit that and basically manipulate him by playing right into that. So everyone knows that Trump wanted to pull out of Syria and was basically being talked into staying by his advisors. So Erdogan gets on the phone with Trump and says, essentially, look, you are supposed to only be there to fight ISIS. ISIS is basically defeated. And you know what? I'll give you my word as a friend. We'll finish off the Islamic State for you. That's according to a description of what Erdogan said, provided to NBC News yesterday by a senior White House official. And Trump essentially says, all right, you know what, fine, you finish off ISIS and we'll go home. Now, what all national security experts who have been following this know is that in addition to the Islamic State problem, what Erdogan is really concerned about, perhaps even more than ISIS, is those Syrian Kurds who have been fighting with the U.S. Against ISIS, but also have their own territorial ambitions for some autonomy in northern Syria, and that Erdogan is planning to go ahead with this operation to essentially wipe out the Kurds that we've been working with east of the Euphrates River, and Trump essentially giving him a green light to do so.
Okay. NBC's Josh Lederman, thank you so much. And Gene Robinson, this sounds way too familiar. You remember when the Russians were dropping bombs claiming to be fighting against ISIS with us, when all they were really doing were killing Assad's, the rebels fighting against Assad. And now you have Erdogan, who has either suckered the president or got a willing president to leave Syria. And so now, instead of, again, fighting ISIS, just like the Russians, they're going to start killing others. In this case, it'll be killing Kurds, the very people who were pushing back against ISIS.
Yeah, I mean, you could, there's a lot of argument about what the proper U.S. policy in Syria, what our policy ought to be, but I think there's near universal agreement that the worst thing to do is to cut and run all of a sudden on a whim, the way President Trump has decided to do it, and it as David said, puts the Kurds in a terrible position. President Erdogan, like other authoritarians around the world, undoubtedly has had drawn up a detailed psychological profile of Donald Trump and what buttons to push and how to push them. He's successful at it. Vladimir Putin is successful at it, and others, the Saudis, are successful at it. They've learned that this guy has buttons, and if you push him the right way, you can get him to do what's in your interest, Turkey and Russia and others, and not necessarily what's in the interest of the United States, because what you do is you feed Donald Trump's ego, and people who are good at that and who can stomach doing that can have a lot of success with Donald Trump.
And how ironic, the same president that said that Barack Obama invented ISIS by cutting and running in Iraq. And he said that throughout the entire campaign. And continues to say it. Well, in the words of Brian Kilmeade at Fox News, if that's the case, then Donald Trump is reinventing ISIS by leaving Syria. Coming up, President Trump's grand plans for his long-touted wall, now down to steel slats. We'll explain that and the administration's continued claims that Mexico is, going to foot the bill for it all. And maybe they'll pay for all of our Christmas presents, too. More on that when we return.
Mark his words. Now the president has forced a government shutdown because he's insisting that American taxpayers pay for that wall. What gives?
Sure. And if you ask the president, he'll point you immediately to something else that didn't get a lot of news in the last couple of weeks, which is this new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, which is so much better for us than the NAFTA deal, that American workers are going to do better, the government is going to do better, and you could make the argument that Mexico is paying for it in that fashion.
But none of that is Mexico paying for the wall. I mean, let's just be
technically, you and I both know that it cannot work exactly like that. I can't spend any money at the Office of Management of Budget. The Department of Homeland Security can't actually spend money from Mexico. We have to get it from the Treasury.
Because you're not going to get it from Mexico. You were never going to get it from Mexico. Everybody said you were never going to get it from Mexico, and you know, back when you were talking about Donald Trump being a terrible human being and talking about how stupid the wall was, you know that Donald Trump was lying to voters when he said that he was going to build a wall and get the money from Mexico. And yet, you go on TV shows, and for God knows why, destroy your reputation. You had a good reputation as a deficit hawk when you were in Congress. Mick, I don't understand it. Never will. why people throw themselves under the bus for Donald Trump. It never ends well for them. So as our own Chris Hayes reimagined the chance at the Trump rallies for 2020, Donald Trump will be going out saying, what are we going to build? The response, aesthetically tasteful steel slats. Who's going to pay for it? The net growth resulting from a mildly renegotiated trade deal. Susan Page doesn't exactly pack the same punch and also doesn't really justify politically a government shutdown that is making less and less sense even to Donald Trump's strongest supporters.
Well, one thing that's remarkable about what Mick Mulvaney said yesterday on the shows was that somehow calling it steel slats would convince Democrats it wasn't a wall and be okay to support it, which, by the way, is not going to happen. I mean, if President Trump could not get funding for his wall when Republicans controlled the House and Senate, why in the world is he going to be able to get funding for the wall when Democrats take over the House? And that's one reason this shutdown doesn't make much sense, because his negotiating position doesn't get stronger if he waits until the new Congress, if he waits until the new year, as Mulvaney said yesterday he's prepared to do. His negotiating position gets weaker. The Democrats have zero incentive to give him any money for his wall.
Well, and Susan, he listened to Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter, who were scalding him on Twitter and on talk radio, despite the fact that he had been given a deal that Republicans wanted him to go with. And so, I mean, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board put it best this morning. They're out with a blistering op-ed that's called The Phony Shutdown War, criticizing President Trump over his strategy for instigating and now navigating the government shutdown. It writes this is the Wall Street Journal. Trump can't decide what he really wants and seems to have no political strategy for achieving whatever it is. This is the Wall Street Journal. First, he surprised everyone by taking public ownership of a possible shutdown in a meeting in the Oval Office with Democratic leaders. By the way, this is the Wall Street Journal saying this. Then he agreed to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's proposal to fund the government for 2 months to move the funding debate into the new year when Democrats run the House. Then the Freedom GOP House Caucus and talk radio hosts stomped their feet and Trump flipped back to welcoming a shutdown and tweeting that, quote, it could be a long stay. I don't know if I told you, but this is a conservative Wall Street Journal editorial page asking the question, to what end? Trump's shutdown tactic is to hold his breath until the other side gives in. This didn't work for Newt Gingrich in 1995, though at least Newt was battling Bill Clinton over major reforms in the entitlement state. Trump is holding his breath over a mere $3.4 billion in spending for a piece of political symbolism. And Rick Tyler, as I have said forever, this is a $5 billion payoff for a political punchline that Donald Trump can deliver at political rallies. You've got American soldiers that are yanked out of Syria and put on the border between Texas and Mexico, again, for more political symbolism. This is a battle over nothing, and it is Republicans who are going to get obliterated by it.
Well, Joe, first let me say that Mick Mulvaney has joined the ranks of horrible human beings. But look, advocating for the wall, where walls can make sense in certain urban areas, and we have walls where they do make sense. Arguing over a wall is like arguing over the Pony Express. So instead of sending your packages by Federal Express or UPS overnight to get them there by tomorrow, Christmas, which some will deliver, it is arguing about the Pony Express. It technologically just makes no sense. It's all regressive. It's backward looking. It won't stop illegal immigration. It certainly won't stop drug trafficking, where you can take a quad drone and lift 30 pounds, 30 miles easily. And it's only going to get more like that. So building a wall is a complete waste of money.
And John Meacham, again, reading the Wall Street Journal, who has at times defended Donald Trump in ways that I found maddening, the editorial page, this is what they say about building the wall. building the wall across the entire 1,954-mile border would be expensive, and it wouldn't stop illegal immigration, since most illegals arrive by overstaying their legal visas. Again, this has been the insanity of this whole build the wall argument for 3 years now. First of all, we have a net negative flow going back into Mexico, and we did during the entire campaign, which we pointed out every day. But secondly, even if you build a wall, you even have the Wall Street Journal saying that doesn't work because most illegal immigration is from people overstaying their legal visas.
Yeah, two things about this. One is the Journal is speaking from a place of classical conservatism there. The Journal, at its best, has embodied the idea of the free flow of people, ideas, and goods. It was a kind of conservatism that was embodied by President Reagan, who talked about improving on the Sermon on the Mount, as only Ronald Reagan could do, making a city upon a hill into a shining city on a hill, talking about free trade and the idea that after Adam Smith, a competition created more wealth, created more liberty. You can argue with that all you want, but at least that's a principled view. I would disagree with the phrase political symbolism. The wall in Donald Trump's land, Trumpland, is not a symbol. It's the whole damn thing. It's the embodiment of the politics of fear over the politics of hope. If he gives up the wall, he's basically admitting that the whole thing was a fraud. I think the whole thing was a fraud, but he's not going to admit that. And the people, and you and I know them, you and I are related to them, they tend to be in more rural, more southern, more western places, but not all. They believe that caravans are coming because they're told that. They believe that immigrants, illegal immigrants, are on crime sprees because that's what they've been told. And they have been told that this wall will fix America. It will keep these people who don't look like us from taking over America, from moving into jobs, from changing the culture. The wall is the whole thing. And so we could argue at the political tactics of this. 6 months from now, no one's going to remember this shutdown. But I think that if you're a Trump supporter and you don't deal with the fact that your entire vote is basically built, and your support is basically built on the idea that you're going to ineffectually and in fact symbolically keep people out of a country that was entirely built on people coming in. If you don't deal with that, we're not going to have this fever break, and this fever's got to break.
Well, it's a fever that's been whipped up by a series of political lies. We don't have an immigration crisis right now. We did a decade ago when we had illegal immigrants rushing across the border, and I was the first one. I'm very conservative when it comes to illegal. Yeah, Rick, I was going to say, I'm really conservative when it comes to immigration, and I want people coming into the United States legally. If I thought a wall would make it harder for floods of illegal immigrants in the future to come to the United States, I would support a wall. It doesn't do anything.
No, and I want to thank John Meacham for pointing out that this is a classic liberalism, or as he phrased it, the classical conservative position, because it is. Because remember, Ronald Reagan's most famous quote was tearing down a wall, not building a wall. But remember what you said about visas. Visa overstays are the biggest source of illegal immigration. And do you know which country has the most visa overstays? I don't want to pick on the Canadians, but it is the Canadians. So why aren't we concerned about visa overstays?
What is that about? It's horrible. Go ahead.
So why aren't we concerned about Canadian visa overstays? Because they're white people. I mean, and I've gotten in this fight over the last week. We've seen, and I think John Meacham's right. It is the whole thing, because it's all about keeping non-white people from crossing the border. The fears are all race-based.
Yeah. All right. Rick Tyler, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really do appreciate it. Hope you have a great Christmas. And coming up next, Senator Bob Corker revives his classic Twitter hashtag, alert the daycare staff. We'll tell you why. And we're also going to be talking more about Jim Mattis's exit from the administration as the president refuses to let his defense secretary dictate his exit after his stinging rebuke of Donald Trump.